The cardboard box landed on the porch with a thud that echoed through the quiet suburban street. Daniel Hayes stood in the doorway of what used to be his own home, the home he had bought with his own hands, the home where he had rocked his son to sleep during thunderstorms, the home where he had grieved his wife alone in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and watched his son Marcus cross his arms like a man who had already made up his mind about something he didn't fully understand. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular brand of patience people use when they've rehearsed something. "This isn't personal." Daniel looked at the box. Inside it was a framed photo of his late wife, Eleanor, a Bible with a cracked spine, 2 flannel shirts, a pair of reading glasses he didn't need anymore but couldn't throw away. The sum total, apparently, of what his son thought he deserved to take with him. "You put your mother's picture in a cardboard box," Daniel said quietly. Marcus shifted. "I needed the space. Jenna and we need the room for the baby. You knew this was coming." "I knew you were going to ask me to give up the guest room," Daniel said. "I didn't know you were going to pack my things while I was at work." Here was what Marcus didn't know about his father. He didn't know that Daniel woke up at 4:47 every morning, not because of an alarm, but because his mind simply refused to waste daylight. He didn't know that Daniel had spent the last 11 years building something quietly, methodically, the way he had always done everything in his life, while Marcus was busy assuming his father was just a retired handyman living off savings and Social Security. Marcus saw an old man, 63 years old, graying at the temples, still wearing the same brand of work boots he'd worn since 1987. A man who drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and clipped coupons on Sunday mornings and didn't own a smartphone until Marcus physically forced one into his hands 2 Christmases ago. What Marcus did not see, because Daniel had never felt the need to broadcast it, was the other life. The one that had started as a hobby, then a side project, then an obsession, and then, quietly and without ceremony, had become the single most profitable endeavor Daniel Hayes had ever undertaken in 63 years of living. Daniel was a digital real estate investor. He bought, built, and sold content websites, the kind of invisible online properties that most people scroll past without ever thinking about who owns them. Travel guides, recipe archives, personal finance blogs, home improvement databases. He had a portfolio of 41 websites that collectively attracted 11 million unique visitors every month, generated revenue through advertising, affiliate commissions, and digital product sales, and deposited, on average, $75,000 into his bank account every single month. He had told no one, not Marcus, not his sister in Phoenix, not the men he played chess with on Thursday afternoons at the library. He had told Eleanor once, 3 weeks before she died, and she had laughed so hard she'd cried, and then held his hand and told him she always knew he had a secret genius hiding somewhere underneath all those flannel shirts. Daniel picked up the cardboard box from the porch. He picked up his wife's photograph. He straightened it against his chest. "I'll get out of your way," he said. And Marcus, God help him, looked relieved. The Magnolia Inn was a 12-room bed and breakfast on the edge of town that Daniel had always liked for no particular reason, except that it had a deep porch and Eleanor had once said it reminded her of a house from a novel she loved. He paid for a month up front in cash, a habit from the early days when he didn't trust banks, and carried his cardboard box up to room 7, which had a writing desk by the window and a view of an oak tree that was probably older than the state of Indiana. He set Eleanor's photograph on the writing desk. He opened his laptop. He went to work. What Daniel had learned over 11 years of building his quiet empire was that wealth is almost never loud. The people who had genuinely changed their financial lives, not the lottery winners, not the inheritance crowd, but the people who had built something real, almost always looked, from the outside, like regular people. They drove ordinary cars. They wore ordinary clothes. They didn't have a burning need to prove anything to anyone, because the proving had already happened in the privacy of their own ledgers. Daniel had grown up poor in a mill town in southern Ohio. His father worked 6 days a week and still never seemed to have enough. Daniel had watched money anxiety slowly erode his parents' marriage the way water erodes limestone, imperceptibly, until one day you notice the whole foundation has shifted. He had vowed, young, that he would understand money better than his parents had, that he would make it work for him instead of chasing it. He had spent his 30s as a general contractor, his 40s rebuilding his business after the 2008 crash nearly wiped him out, and then, at 52, sitting in the waiting room of a leaner's oncologist, too sick with fear to read the magazines, he had pulled out the old laptop he used for invoicing and typed into Google, "How do people make money online?" He had expected nonsense. He had found instead a rabbit hole. 7 months later, a leaner was in remission, and Daniel had launched his first website, a practical guide to deck construction and outdoor renovation. He had written every word himself, drawing on 30 years of contractor knowledge, and within 14 months it was earning $4,000 a month from advertising and affiliate links to the tools he'd always used. He reinvested everything. He hired writers. He bought existing sites and improved them. He learned about SEO and content strategy and digital advertising with the same methodical patience he had once applied to learning how to properly flash a chimney or frame a cathedral ceiling. He made mistakes. He lost money on 3 acquisitions that turned out to be garbage. He adapted. By the time Aliner died, 6 years later, the portfolio was generating $20,000 a month. By the time Marcus packed his father's flannel shirts into a cardboard box, it was generating $75,000. Daniel spent 3 weeks at the Magnolia Inn before he did something he had not planned. He bought a house. Not a big house. A 1940s craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street 4 miles from Marcus's neighborhood, with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that needed complete renovation and a back garden that had gone completely wild. It cost him $240,000. He paid cash. He called a contractor, out of old habit. He checked the man's work carefully before hearing him and began the renovation. While the contractors worked, Daniel sat on a folding chair in the back garden with his laptop and ran his business. He drank coffee from a thermos. He wore his flannel shirts. He talked to no one about what he was doing. Word got around the neighborhood, the way word always does in small towns, that an older man had bought the old Whitfield place and was fixing it up. People walked past and looked. A woman named Helen, who lived 2 doors down and grew tomatoes with the intensity of someone training for competition, brought him a jar of preserved peaches and asked if he needed any recommendations for local tradespeople. "I know a few things about construction myself," Daniel said. Helen looked at the folding chair, the thermos, the 10-year-old truck in the driveway. "What do you do?" she asked. "I'm retired," Daniel said, which was what he always said. It was Marcus who broke the silence. 6 weeks after the cardboard box incident, Daniel received a text message, not a phone call, a text that said, "Jenna had the baby. It's a girl. 7 pounds 4 oz. Everyone is healthy." Daniel read it 4 times. He drove to the hospital and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes because he was trying to get his breathing under control, and he was 63 years old, and he was not going to cry in a hospital parking lot. He went in, he found the room, he knocked. Jenna was the one who said, "Come in." She looked exhausted and luminous in the way new mothers do, like someone who has just survived something enormous and is not entirely sure it's over. The baby was in her arms, wrapped in a striped blanket, looking the way all newborns look, like a very opinionated old man who has been recently inconvenienced. Marcus was sitting in the chair beside the bed. When he saw his father, something complicated moved across his face. Guilt, defensiveness, relief, love, all of it tangled together the way emotions get when people haven't talked for 6 weeks and neither one of them is good at talking. "She's beautiful," Daniel said. "What's her name?" "Eleanor," Jenna said softly. "We're calling her Ellie." Daniel looked at his son. Marcus looked at the floor. "Thank you," Daniel said, to Jenna and then, after a moment, to Marcus too. It was another 3 weeks before the confrontation happened. Daniel had invited Marcus to see the house, not to show off, just because he thought Marcus should know his father wasn't sleeping in a ditch somewhere, and because Jenna had quietly pushed for it in the way good daughters-in-law do when they understand that their husbands are being idiots and need a nudge. Marcus drove over on a Saturday morning. He stood on the front sidewalk and looked at the bungalow, which by now had fresh paint and reglazed windows, and a porch that Daniel had rebuilt himself over 2 weekends because he trusted his own hands more than anyone else's on finished carpentry. "You bought this," Marcus said. "I did." "How?" "I had some savings." Daniel held the door open. "Come see the kitchen." The kitchen was white oak and matte black, an original tile that Daniel had tracked down from a salvage company in Cincinnati. Marcus walked through it slowly, the way people walk through places that surprise them, recalibrating. "Dad," Marcus said finally in the living room, standing in front of the fireplace that Daniel had repointed and cleaned and filled with a stack of fresh oak logs. "I don't understand. You drove a 14 pickup. You clipped coupons. I thought you were struggling," Daniel said. Marcus had the decency to look ashamed. "I thought you were living on Social Security and whatever was left of Mom's life insurance. That's why I thought, with the baby coming, that maybe it made more sense for you to live in your guest room," Daniel said. "I should have talked to you about it instead of just—" Marcus stopped. "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm genuinely sorry. That was wrong. Packing your stuff while you were gone. I don't know why I did it that way." "Because you didn't think I had anywhere better to go," Daniel said, without bitterness. "You thought you were managing a situation. You thought I was a problem to be solved." Marcus didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Daniel sat down in the armchair by the fireplace, his chair in his house, chosen by him, and gestured for his son to sit. "Let me tell you something about your mother," he said. He told Marcus about the oncologist's waiting room. He told him about the Google search and the rabbit hole and the first website about deck construction and the 14 months and the $4,000 a month and the reinvestment and the acquisitions and the writers and the 3 that failed and the 38 that didn't. He told him about the 11 million monthly visitors and the 41 properties and the $75,000 a month that arrived, reliably, whether Daniel was sitting in a folding chair in a wild garden or sleeping, or driving his 10-year-old truck to the library to play chess. He told him about Eleanor laughing until she cried. Marcus sat across from him and didn't speak for a long time. $75,000, Marcus finally said, a month. On average, some months more. And you were this whole time, you were just working, Daniel said. I was just working, the way I always worked, the way your grandfather worked. You put your head down and you learn what you need to learn and you don't quit, and eventually the numbers start to look different. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel thought about this. Because you never asked, he said, and because I didn't need you to know. I wasn't building it so that people would be impressed. I built it because your mother was sick and I was sitting in a waiting room and I needed something to do with my hands, except I didn't have my hands. I just had a laptop and a head full of 30 years of contractor knowledge. He paused. And because I grew up watching money make people anxious and strange and competitive. I didn't want that in my family. Your grandfather never told anyone what he earned. Never. He thought it was private. I think he was right. Marcus was quiet for a long time. I put Mom's picture in a cardboard box, he said finally. You did. Dad, I know, Daniel said. I know you are. They had lunch together. Daniel had made soup from scratch, the way a leaner used to, and talked for 3 hours. Not about money mostly. About Ellie, and what it had felt like to hold her, and what Marcus was frightened about, and what Daniel remembered about the early years of fatherhood, and about Alina, and about the house in its early days when the mortgage felt like a stone around their necks, and Marcus was 4 years old, and once flushed an entire loaf of bread down the toilet for reasons he could never adequately explain. Before Marcus left, he stood on the porch and looked at the house again. "It looks like something Mom would have loved," he said. "That's why I bought it." Marcus nodded. He hugged his father, a real hug, the kind they hadn't exchanged in longer than either of them wanted to admit. Then he walked to his car and stopped and turned around. "Dad," he said, "will you teach me what you do, the websites, all of it?" Daniel looked at his son, 34 years old, a new father, a man with more pride than sense and more love than he knew how to show, and a whole life still stretching out ahead of him. "Come by next Saturday," Daniel said. "Bring Ellie." On the last Saturday of October, Daniel Hayes sat at the white oak desk in the study of his craftsman bungalow, Alina's photograph beside his laptop, morning light cutting through the old wavy glass of the windows he had reglazed himself. His phone showed a notification from one of his analytics platforms. A piece of content on one of his home renovation sites had gone moderately viral overnight, a practical guide to repointing a brick fireplace, with photographs and detailed step-by-step instructions that Daniel had written himself, from memory, on a Tuesday evening. 11,000 new visitors overnight, ad revenue up, affiliate link clicks spiking. He smiled at the photograph on the desk. You would have thought this was hilarious, he thought. A retired contractor making money because he knew how to fix a fireplace. In 3 hours, Marcus would arrive with Jenna and baby Ellie, and a list of questions Daniel suspected had kept him up half the night. Daniel would make coffee and they would sit at the kitchen table, and he would begin, patiently, at the beginning. Not because the money mattered. It had stopped being about the money a long time ago. Because the look on his son's face, standing in the kitchen with the white oak and the matte black and the salvaged tile, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his father, that had reminded Daniel of something he'd almost forgotten. That the best things, the most valuable things, are almost never the ones that announce themselves. They're the ones built quietly, over years, in the hours before the world wakes up, by people in flannel shirts who already know something about putting in the work. Baby Ellie, for her part, would grow up knowing her grandfather as simply Daniel, the man with the warm house and the oak tree in the garden, and the laptop always open on the desk. She would not know, until she was much older, that he had built something extraordinary out of a waiting room and a fear, and a love so large it needed somewhere to go. By then, she would be helping him run it.